Hello again, I am Blunty, and this, as I'm sure I don't have to actually explain to anyone clicking on this video, is the MonsterHunter benchmark tool. Something the MonsterHunter community quite loudly begged Capcom for after the first beta ran late last year, where its very old code base and subsequent performance issues and bugs caused a lot of concern in the fandom. Well, Capcom of course delivered, and the benchmark tool runs on much newer code, very close to, or as practically as possible, representative of day one code and performance. But we have seen a lot of people parroting the opinion, and it is an opinion, that because the benchmark contains cutscenes, these somehow artificially bloat or invalidate even the benchmark score and average frame rate reported. So, today, I'll be modding the benchmark tool itself to remove the cutscenes and only use the so-called gameplay section of the benchmark to arrive at a score that only focuses on the most performance-demanding part of this benchmark, the sequence that has the lowest average frame rate. Well, that's right, kids. That is how dedicated and, frankly, obsessive the MonsterHunter community can get. There are people out here who will create bespoke mods even for a friggin' benchmarking tool before the game even launches. And I think that's kind of friggin' amazing, don't you? How cool is that? Now, just before we bite into the mod proper, I want to carve out some perspective here and clear up a misconception that seems to be metastasizing in the community of at least the less technically minded players who don't fully understand how this stuff works, because they just, they play their games, they enjoy the games, that's fine, you don't have to be a tech head, but if you're not a tech head, maybe pull back on how confident you are about spreading stuff you've heard other people say. So here's the issue. An average score in a gaming benchmark tool like this, by design, includes various parts of representative gameplay experiences. That's why it's an average. If you only use one spot in the game, one particular part of the gameplay experience, it cannot, by definition, be a representative average. If you are benchmarking, let's say GTA 5, or I guess GTA 6 would be the front of mind for many right now, but GTA 5 is what we have to show you. You don't just go out to the desert or the suburbs and sit in a parked car for a while and see how the frame rate does. You test in the city, you test over the city, inside a car, outside a car, you test crashes, you test gunfire, you test a variety of different scenarios. That's what makes it useful. I will say though, the GTA 5 benchmark, while not perfect, it could have used some sort of on-foot walking around pedestrian style stuff, for example, to be, even better representative. But it is a lot better designed than the Wilds one. But we can put that down to Capcom having to kind of rush it out within a couple of months rather very quickly, and never originally planning on building one at all, so I can afford Capcom a little forgiveness on that one and just be thankful we got something at all. Anyway, as for the cutscenes in the Wilds benchmark, artificially bloating, quote-unquote, the final score, that's just people not understanding how this crap works. See, all of the cutscenes here, and parts people will call quote-unquote non-gameplay, are still 100% rendered in real time in the game engine using the exact same assets, same models, same textures, same lighting that the quote-unquote real gameplay uses. And they do this very deliberately, because if they didn't do this, our own character, our specific character design, how they look, their face, and their specific weapons you happen to have equipped, and whatever armor you're wearing, are all correctly represented in these cutscenes. They have to render them live, otherwise that can't happen. They're not pre-rendered, they're not cinematics, and so do, in fact, capital F-A-C-T, completely accurately represent the performance of the real-time rendering of the game. That said, the more carefully directed nature of these cutscenes, with preset camera angles, often tighter shots with less visual scope of the overall environment, and shots focusing on just the characters themselves, close-ups and whatnot, and the fact they tend to often, but not always, take place in smaller, more enclosed locations than the combat part of the game does, will, of course, mean they are easier to run. But I do not, for a moment, agree with anyone who claims this fact magically invalidates the benchmark's usefulness. or makes it a fake score or a bloated score or something I've seen people claim. It's useful because it is an average across several ways the game represents. It would be less useful if it didn't do that. However, it is also true at the same time that the most active part of the game, the core gameplay itself, of the gameplay loop we'll be most engaged with most often, is the part that takes place out in the open fields where the hunts happen. And this is where we are going to care most about hitting our target frame rates, because this is where it matters most. And if you're looking for recommendations, by the way, if you are on hardware that does struggle with this pig of a game, and let's not mince words about it, it is a pig of a game. I've talked about it being a pig of a game. I've talked about World before it being a pig of a game. I would strongly suggest targeting 45 FPS. It's a real nice balance between the game feeling snappy and responsive in actual battle, you know, the real gameplay if you like, versus not having to sacrifice more visual fidelity. Those of you on stronger rigs, of course, 60 FPS is the natural target. But if you can't get there without feeling like you're making too many visual sacrifices, try 45 FPS. It does feel pretty damn good. And while we're at it, I would not suggest even thinking about using frame gen unless you are hitting 40 FPS minimum. Absolute bare bones minimum. Don't turn it on unless you are at 40 FPS solidly. Because using frame gen from a 30 FPS base goes against the advice from the people who make the frame gen technology, AMD and Nvidia both, for extremely good reasons of latency and input lag and just general feel. Absolutely do not recommend or advise using frame gen. You look at their guides and their articles and whatnot they put out when they released this stuff. Frame gen is not a tool for making up for crappy frame rates. It's a tool for making good frame rates seem even more fluid on very high refresh rate monitors. That is what they're designed for, that is what they're advertised for, that is what they're advised for from the people who designed the technology. Capcom are really out of line using a 30 FPS floor and frame gen as their recommended settings for this game. It is very irresponsible, very misleading, and very, very ignorant, and it makes me furious. Now then, finally, the mod itself. It's very simple and relies on RE framework, which if you've done any modding in basically any recent Capcom game, you will already be familiar with. I've already used it a lot while fiddling with mods in Rise and Sunbreak. It is a single file installation that does not even overwrite any original game files, so it's very easy to install and very easy to remove. For this particular mod, you're going to need to use the nightly build of RE Framework. Once you've got that installed, there's a single directory of a few files that are the mod itself. Once more, it does not overwrite any original game files. It sits in a separate folder in the game install directory, so it is super easy to install and remove completely with no trace left behind should you ever need to return to an absolute vanilla state of the game, or in this case, benchmark. It's one of the things I love most about how RE Framework modding works. The full usage instructions will be on the GitHub page I'll link you to where the download is, but it works just like any other basic RE Framework mod does, activating or deactivating through the RE Framework popover panel. And the mod works exactly as you would expect. It skips the so-called non-gameplay scenes and only uses the part of the benchmark that happens in the windswept plains, including the entrance to the hidden village, which because of the busy nature of that scene tends to be where frame rates dip again. The mod will also adjust the final score at the end to compensate for the points you miss by skipping the other scenes. I am not sure how much I trust this adjusted score in absolute terms. Chances are it's a bit spongy just by the fact of how it had to be done, but it will at the very least, and as far as my own testing has proven so far, will be just as consistent as the real full benchmark run score is when it comes to direct comparisons like for like between settings changes. So that makes it very, very useful. So if you're just after a way to fine-tune your settings very specifically for the most difficult and demanding part of the benchmark, which is a quite sensible thing to do, frankly, now you can, and do so much, much faster than having to rerun the whole damn thing every time, and also constantly watching the live frame rate counter for that specific sequence, so you can see where the frame rate is in that part. Now you can just let it run, get your score and your average FPS over just this isolated section, and make adjustments a lot more time efficiently. And then you'll have yourself a very solid starting point for your settings upon full release. However, do keep in mind that you might still need to fine-tune your settings in the final game, because there's no real combat on show here in the benchmark, and some monsters, like Ray Dow for example, have a few very effects-heavy attacks that might still cause small dips below your target frame rate. Or maybe places like the Scarlet Forest, which has much more foliage on offer and more water pools asking more of the ray-traced reflections than the Desert Oasis does. These might cause you to drop below your target frame rate a little bit. We just don't know yet. The benchmark tool is all we have for now, and while it is limited, it is still very useful. Especially with this mod, which allows us to target the problem area so much easier. So, hopefully you found this video useful. I'm sure you know what to do if you did. Like, subscribe, share, comment, blah, blah, blah. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you to the patrons, of course. I am Blunty, and I will catch you next time.